An elderly man of 89 years, thin and frail, quietly entered a bustling cafe and humbly asked for a simple sandwich. Instead of receiving the kindness he hoped for, he was met with cold indifference and disdain from the staff. Among the customers, however, there was a well-dressed, wealthy woman who observed the entire situation from her seat. As her eyes fixated on something glimmering on the man's wrist, her heart suddenly raced. She froze in her seat, feeling a wave of recognition wash over her. Unable to ignore the overwhelming feeling, she stood up and approached him. When she saw the object more closely, her face turned pale as if she'd just seen a ghost. The comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee hung in the air, mixing with the gentle hum of conversations that filled the cafe. It was an ordinary day like any other, until an odd hush fell over the room when the elderly man walked in. The cafe door creaked open, drawing the attention of a few patrons, as an elderly man slowly entered. His steps were hesitant, almost as if he was dragging his feet across the threshold. At 89 years old, Henry was a man clearly worn down by the weight of both time and hardship. His frail, hunched body reflected a lifetime of struggle. The clothes he wore were threadbare and faded, offering little protection against the biting cold outside. His shoes, barely intact, had worn so thin that his toes peeked through the holes. With trembling hands, Henry moved carefully through the cafe, his gaze fixed on the floor, doing his best to avoid the judgmental stares and hushed whispers of the other customers. Their disapproving eyes followed him as he made his way to the counter, though he did his best to ignore the heavy atmosphere of rejection that seemed to surround him. The low murmurs around the cafe reached Henry's ears, but to him they felt like harsh judgments. Every quiet whisper and glance seemed to be directed at him, amplifying the shame he already carried. Despite the humiliation that weighed heavily on his frail shoulders, the pain of his empty stomach urged him forward. Each step felt like a struggle, a clash between his fragile dignity and the stark reality of his hunger. Henry barely lifted his eyes, knowing that the disdain in the room was palpable. He was unwelcome here, but he had no other choice. When he finally reached the counter, Henry carefully laid his few coins down, his trembling fingers brushing against the worn countertop. The cafe's owner, a stern-looking woman named Linda, stood behind the counter. She was middle-aged, with sharp features and a cold demeanor that was as unwelcoming as the looks from the other customers. Linda, known for her cold temperament, looked Henry up and down with a disgusted expression. Her apron, once crisp and white, was now stained with spilled coffee, but the disdain in her eyes held a far deeper stain, one of prejudice. "I just wanted the cheapest sandwich, please," Henry said in a hoarse, barely audible voice that was almost drowned out by the quiet murmurs around him. His dirty, cracked nails and trembling fingers fumbled with the coins, trying to keep his composure, attempting to project a shred of confidence. Linda crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering and stern. "This isn't a homeless shelter, old man," she said with a harsh tone that sliced through the air like a knife, making Henry flinch. The cruelty in her words was clear, and the weight of her judgment pressed heavily on him. Henry shuddered at Linda's harsh words. "If you don't have money, don't eat," she snapped. The weight of humiliation crushed him, but he took a deep breath, struggling to keep his composure intact. "Please," Henry whispered, his voice barely audible. "Anything you can spare? I'm hungry." The desperation in his eyes was unmistakable. His plea was quiet, but the raw need behind it spoke volumes. The air in the cafe felt even heavier, thick with discomfort, as some customers exchanged uneasy glances. Yet no one stepped forward to help. Linda leaned in closer, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you really think you can just walk in here and ask for free food?" She sneered, her words sharp and cutting. The murmurs from the other customers grew louder, and Henry felt the weight of their judgment, as if they were pushing him out the door with their silent disapproval. "Go somewhere else," Linda said, her voice dripping with contempt. "We don't have leftovers here." The murmurs around the cafe turned into quiet, mocking laughter. A nearby customer shook his head with a sarcastic smile. "Yeah, that's right," he chimed in. "Get out of here, old man. We don't need you around." Henry stood frozen, tears welling up in his eyes. He didn't know whether to walk away or try to plead one last time. His stomach growled painfully, the hunger gnawing at him. But the shame was even worse. He felt utterly invisible, as if every struggle, every hardship he had ever faced, was being judged by the strangers surrounding him. In that moment, the cafe was filled with an awkward silence, one that only magnified the humiliation weighing down on Henry, making him feel smaller and more unwanted than ever. The silence in the cafe felt unbearable to Henry, weighing down on him like a heavy blanket of shame. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and escape the judgmental stares, but his legs refused to move. It was as if he were paralyzed by the overwhelming humiliation. Just as hope seemed to slip completely from his thoughts, the cafe door swung open once more. The entrance of an elegant and determined woman immediately drew everyone's attention. Sophia, with her well-groomed brown hair and dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, walked into the room with a commanding presence. Her confident stride and narrowed gaze showed she was no stranger to difficult situations. Sophia took in the scene with a single glance, her eyes moving quickly from Henry's trembling form to the sneering expression on Linda's face. Without a moment's hesitation, she made her way toward the counter, the tension in the room shifting as she approached. "Please let me know if you would like to continue from here, or if you would like a full document replacement as the initial file provided." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Linda, who had moments earlier been full of arrogance and contempt, suddenly appeared uncertain upon realizing who had just walked in. Sophia wasn't just any customer. She was well known in the city for owning a chain of luxury boutiques, and her presence commanded immediate respect. "What seems to be the problem here?" Sophia asked, her voice firm and controlled, though it was laced with clear disapproval. Her gaze settled on Henry, who stood frozen, still trying to hold on to whatever dignity he had left. Linda, attempting to regain her composure, straightened her posture, but the power dynamic had shifted, and she knew it. Sophia's calm yet intense presence left Linda flustered, and the cafe, once filled with disdain toward Henry, now watched in silence, curious about how this sudden intervention would unfold. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the outcome of this unexpected intervention. The tension in the air was thick, as all eyes were now on Sophia and the frail old man she was defending. Sophia glanced at Henry and, with a warm and reassuring smile, extended her hand. "Don't worry, sir," she said softly. "Today your lunch is on me." Henry looked at her in disbelief, his tear-filled eyes suddenly gleaming with a glimmer of hope. It had been so long since anyone had shown him kindness, and the gesture left him stunned. Sophia then turned her sharp gaze toward Linda, who was still struggling to maintain her authority, clearly taken aback by the interruption. The tension that had initially existed between Henry and Linda had now completely shifted, with the focus entirely on Sophia's commanding presence and Linda's wavering confidence. The cafe patrons, who had been indifferent moments ago, now watched in silence, awaiting what would happen next. Sophia stood her ground, exuding a quiet but undeniable strength. Linda, still defensive, insisted, "I already told you, this man cannot be served here. This isn't a place for that kind of people." Sophia remained calm, but her eyes flashed with intensity, causing Linda to hesitate. "That kind of people?" Sophia repeated, leaning slightly forward. "I believe we're talking about a human being, not some stray. Isn't that right, Linda?" The cafe patrons, who had been entertained by Henry's humiliation just moments ago, now watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. The dynamic had shifted dramatically. Sophia, standing tall and resolute, refused to back down. Henry, who had kept his head down in shame, slowly raised his eyes toward the woman defending him. His trembling hands still clutched the few coins he had painstakingly gathered. He didn't know if he should speak, but the words wouldn't come. He was overwhelmed by a flood of gratitude and shame. "I will pay for anything he needs," Sophia said firmly, turning her attention back to Henry. "He has the same right to be here as any other customer." Her gaze swept over the other customers, daring anyone to challenge her. Linda, trying to regain her composure, scoffed. "We don't offer charity here. If he can't pay, he shouldn't be here. That's how we run our business." "Business?" Sophia interrupted, her tone calm but laced with a hint of irony. A slight smile touched her lips. "Businesses are made of people, Linda, and it seems you've forgotten that." She took a step closer, her presence growing even stronger. Sophia, now speaking loudly enough for the entire cafe to hear, declared, "I've been a customer here for years, and I never imagined I would witness something so inhumane." The soft whispers among the customers ceased, and a heavy silence took over the room. Linda, visibly flustered, struggled to maintain her composure. She knew all too well that Sophia's reputation in the city carried weight, and any confrontation could damage her cafe's image. Still, her pride wouldn't allow her to back down easily. Crossing her arms as if to solidify her position, Linda responded, "This isn't a charity center. If he doesn't have money, I can't help him." Sophia let out a brief, humorless laugh, though her eyes remained cold and sharp. "You speak of charity," she replied, "but you don't seem to understand. You're treating a person as if they're less than human. Charity is a choice, Linda. Humanity, on the other hand, shouldn't be." Henry, who had been standing silently through the entire exchange, was overwhelmed by a storm of emotions. It had been so long since anyone had stood up for him, let alone someone as poised and distinguished as Sophia. The crushing humiliation he had felt earlier slowly started to dissolve, replaced by surprise and gratitude. He could barely hold back the tears threatening to spill from his eyes. Seeing Henry's shaken expression, Sophia softened her tone and leaned toward him. "Don't worry," she said gently, her voice now full of warmth. "Today, you can eat whatever you want." She placed her hand over his trembling fingers, gently pushing the coins back toward him. "Keep this. You don't need to worry about paying." Linda, feeling her control of the situation slipping away, and embarrassed by how it was unfolding in front of everyone, tried to wrap up the conversation quickly. "Very well, ma'am," she muttered, her pride still intact. "If that's what you want, so be it. But this won't happen again." Linda muttered under her breath, her pride still bruised. "This won't happen again." Sophia remained undeterred, her smile calm but firm. "What won't happen again, Linda, is how you treat people here. Because I'll make sure everyone knows how you run your business." Linda froze, her face paling as the weight of Sophia's words hit her. She knew that a confrontation with someone of Sophia's standing could have serious consequences. Meanwhile, the other customers, who had earlier turned a blind eye, now shifted uncomfortably, clearly reconsidering what they had witnessed. Henry, finally regaining a sense of dignity, was gently led to a table by one of the staff, still under Sophia's watchful eye. She followed him with a mix of sadness and satisfaction. Something about Henry touched her deeply, a connection she couldn't quite explain. As he settled into his chair, Sophia joined him, pulling up a seat across from him. "Now, sir," Sophia said warmly, her once commanding tone now gentle and inviting, "let's take care of that hunger. What would you like to eat?" Henry, unsure how to express the overwhelming gratitude swelling in his heart, mumbled, "I don't know how to thank you, ma'am." "What you're doing for me." Sophia shook her head with a kind smile. "No need to thank me, Henry. Let's just focus on a good meal first, and then we can talk." The waiter, still somewhat reluctant, arrived with Henry's plate, an unassuming sandwich and a cup of coffee. He placed them on the table without much enthusiasm, but under Sophia's stern gaze, he refrained from making any further remarks. Henry stared at the plate before him, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. It was just a simple sandwich, but to him it felt like a feast. Henry's fingers, still trembling, slowly reached for the sandwich, but he hesitated, as if waiting for it all to vanish like a dream. The kindness shown to him felt so unreal, as though it could disappear at any moment. "You can eat," Sophia encouraged with a soft smile, her earlier firmness replaced by warmth. "It's yours. You deserve it." Henry nodded, overcome with gratitude, and took his first cautious bite. The hunger that had gnawed at him for so long seemed to wash away the shame and embarrassment he had felt just moments earlier. He chewed slowly, savoring each bite, almost as if it were a sacred act. Sophia watched him in silence, her heart heavy with a mix of compassion and something deeper, an inexplicable connection to this man. As Henry ate, the cafe returned to an uneasy sense of normalcy. Linda, still fuming over Sophia's intervention, had retreated to the back, whispering with her staff and casting occasional glances toward the table where Henry and Sophia sat. The atmosphere, however, still carried the weight of what had transpired, like a tension waiting to be resolved. It was then that something caught Sophia's eye. As she adjusted her bag on the table, a glint from Henry's wrist drew her attention. At first she didn't think much of it, but something about the watch, its shape, its style, stirred a distant memory. She blinked a few times, trying to push the thought aside, but the more she looked at it, the more familiar it became. "Mr. Henry," she said softly, her tone now tinged with curiosity, "may I see your watch?" "May I see your watch?" Sophia asked, her curiosity piqued. Henry, slightly confused, paused his meal and glanced at his wrist, as if only now remembering he was still wearing it. "Oh, of course," he said softly, carefully unfastening the strap. As he handed it to her, he murmured, "It's a keepsake from someone very important to me." Sophia took the watch, her fingers trembling as they brushed over the cool metal. The familiar texture triggered a flood of memories. Ones she had tried to lock away long ago. Turning it over in her hands, her heart suddenly raced. There, engraved on the underside in delicate letters, was a name that sent a chill down her spine. Benjamin. She brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide in shock. This was the same watch she had given as a gift years ago to the man who had meant everything to her. Benjamin, the man she had loved deeply and lost tragically. How had this watch, this symbol of her past, ended up with Henry? "Where did you get this watch?" Sophia's voice trembled as she asked, her eyes locked on the piece as though it had reopened a wound she had believed long healed. Henry, sensing the emotion in her voice but unsure of its cause, looked perplexed. "It was a gift," he said hesitantly, "a gift from my son, Benjamin." His words struck Sophia like a physical blow. Her suspicions were true. Henry's son was none other than Benjamin, the man she had mourned for years. Her heart raced, a whirlwind of emotions, sadness, longing, and disbelief, sweeping over her. Still unsure of her reaction, Henry continued, his voice quieter now. "Benjamin? He passed away many years ago. After he left, life was never the same." Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she fought to hold them back, struggling to maintain her composure. The shock of the discovery was overwhelming. Benjamin had vanished from her life so suddenly, without any chance for a proper goodbye, and now here was his father, sitting in front of her, broken by the hardships of life, holding the only object that still tied her to the man she had loved so deeply. He was my. Sophia tried to speak, but the flood of emotions choked her. Henry, sensing her distress and slowly beginning to understand, asked in a voice filled with surprise and pain, "You knew my son?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak immediately. She gazed at Henry with a mixture of affection and sorrow. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she confessed, "I loved him. I loved him more than anything in this world." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken grief. Henry sat in stunned disbelief, struggling to process the revelation. Sophia, meanwhile, clutched the watch tightly, afraid that this last remaining piece of Benjamin might be taken from her again. Why didn't I ever know about you?" Henry asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of curiosity and regret. Sophia took a deep breath, bracing herself to reopen old wounds she had long tried to forget. "It's a long story," she said softly, meeting Henry's eyes, which now looked at her with more understanding. In that moment, Henry no longer seemed like just a stranger in need, but someone intricately connected to her past. "I think we need to talk," Sophia continued, holding Benjamin's watch as if it were a fragile, precious relic, capable of shattering with the weight of all their memories. Every detail of the watch transported her back to a time she had thought was lost forever. The watch shimmered faintly in Sophia's hands, its worn shine and the delicate engraving on the back tugging her back to a time she had long tried to bury. She remembered how Benjamin used to twist the watch on his wrist as they talked, a small habit that had once made her smile. Now, those memories rushed back like an avalanche, overwhelming her with emotions she had thought she'd moved past. It was as if all the moments they'd shared were flooding back, as vivid as ever. Henry watched her, his eyes watery, the confusion he had initially felt slowly giving way to understanding. He recognized the expression on Sophia's face, the deep, unspoken grief of someone who had truly loved his son. In that moment, the connection between them was undeniable. They both carried the same pain, the same weight of loss. "He never mentioned you," Henry said softly, his voice hoarse and heavy with emotion. He seemed hesitant, as though he wasn't sure if he was ready to hear what Sophia had to say. But at the same time, he felt an overwhelming need to know. Sophia sighed, her fingers still holding the watch as if it were a fragile piece of her past. "I don't know where to begin," she said, her voice tinged with melancholy. Her heart was heavy with memories, each one more bittersweet than the last. "I met Benjamin when we were young," she began, her eyes distant, lost in the past. "I worked in a boutique. It was my first real job in the city. He used to come by often, bringing donations for the orphanage where I grew up. That's how we became close." Henry's eyes widened in surprise. "Orphanage?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophia nodded slowly, her gaze still clouded with the memories of her youth. "Yes," she said softly. "I was raised there since I was a child. I never knew my parents, but the orphanage became my home. And it was there that I met Benjamin. He was so kind, so full of life. We had dreams, plans for the future, until everything changed." Henry fell silent, absorbing every word. Sophia's pain mirrored his own, but now, hearing her story, he realized that there was a part of his son's life he had never known, a part he had lost before he could ever truly understand it. As Sophia shared her story, Henry realized there had been a side to Benjamin's life that he never knew, one that had slipped away before he had a chance to understand it. His heart tightened with both regret and gratitude. Gratitude, because in Sophia he had found someone who shared the same deep love for his son. "I never knew that part of his life," Henry murmured, lowering his head. "After Benjamin died, Olivia, my wife, she always blamed someone. She used to say he distanced himself because of a woman, but she never told me the details. All I knew was that after he was gone, nothing was ever the same." Sophia shuddered at the mention of Olivia, Benjamin's mother. No further explanation was needed. She remembered her all too well, the distant and tense encounters with a stern woman whose high expectations could never be met. Olivia had made it clear that Sophia was not the kind of woman she wanted for her son. "Olivia never accepted me," Sophia confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "She never thought I was good enough for Benjamin. That created a rift between him and his family. He was torn, trying to be the perfect son while also wanting to live his own life with me. It was a very difficult time." Henry looked up, visibly moved. He hadn't realized the depth of the burden his son had carried, the internal conflict that had pulled him away from his family. Olivia had always convinced him that the fault lay with the woman Benjamin loved. But now, sitting across from Sophia, Henry understood that the pain had been far deeper and more complex than he had ever imagined. "He never stopped visiting me," Henry said with a long, weary sigh. "But it was rare, too rare." Henry let out a tired sigh as he continued, his voice growing weaker, weighed down by the painful memories. "And then, when the accident happened." Sophia felt a knot tighten in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, the moment where everything had unraveled. Henry's voice trembled as he spoke. "It all happened so fast. Benjamin was with her, and I never knew exactly what happened. He was gone, and all I had left was this watch." His eyes fixated on the watch in Sophia's trembling hands, as if it were the last thread connecting him to his son. Sophia closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She had been there that day, the day everything changed. The memory was still a raw, open wound, one that had never fully healed. "I was with him," she whispered, breaking the heavy silence. The confession hung in the air. "We were on our way to a friend's house, but we never made it. There was an accident. It all happened so fast, and when I woke up," her voice faltered, "he was already gone." The tears she had been holding back finally fell, and she covered her face with her hands, allowing herself to sink into the grief of that moment, reliving the pain she had tried to bury for so long. Henry watched her, deeply moved, his own tears quietly streaming down the weathered lines of his face. "I never knew," he whispered, his voice breaking under the weight of sorrow and regret. "I never knew you were with him." Sophia shook her head, her voice trembling as she tried to regain control over her emotions. "I loved him with all my heart," she said softly, "and I lost everything that day." While Sophia had tried to move forward with her life, the past had always haunted her, and Henry, now sitting before her, had sunk deeper and deeper into sadness and regret until his existence had dwindled to what she saw now, a tired, broken man just trying to survive the remnants of his once full life. I can't believe it. Henry murmured, shaking his head slowly, still trying to absorb the shock. You were the woman he loved, and I never knew how much that meant to him. Sophia quickly wiped her tears, struggling to regain her composure. I didn't know Benjamin was your son until now, she admitted softly. But when I saw the watch, everything came flooding back, all the memories. He always wore it, the gift I gave him when we started dreaming about the future together. Henry seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant, locked on a time long gone. He spoke little about you, he continued, almost in a whisper. But I always knew something was pulling him away from us. Olivia, my wife, she never accepted the idea of Benjamin being with someone outside of our circle. She always hoped he'd marry someone from society, someone who could elevate our family's position. His voice trembled, heavy with guilt and sadness. Sophia nodded, fully understanding the weight of his words. She hated me, she said quietly. Whenever I tried to get close, I could feel her disdain. And Benjamin, he was caught between two worlds, trying to please everyone. He was a good man, Henry said, his voice filled with sorrow. He wanted to make everyone happy, but it tore him apart. Henry took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the table. After he was gone, Olivia and I grew even further apart. She blamed herself, and deep down, I think she blamed me too. That's when everything started to fall apart. Sophia looked at him with deep empathy. How did you end up here? She asked softly, her voice gentle, as though each word was carefully chosen to avoid reopening old wounds. Henry let out a deep, tired sigh. The weight of his story seemed to press his shoulders down further, as if the years of pain were physically crushing him. After Benjamin died, Olivia was never the same, Henry continued, his voice thick with sorrow. She sank deeper into grief, and I lost my footing too. Our marriage couldn't survive it. The guilt, the mourning, it drove us apart. I distanced myself from everything. We had a comfortable life, but the emptiness he left behind was unbearable. His voice broke, tears threatening to spill. Olivia always blamed me. She'd say that if I had been firmer with Benjamin, he would have chosen another path, stayed away from you. And in my weakness, I believed her for a long time. Hearing this, Sophia felt a deep weight settle in her chest. Knowing that Olivia had blamed her for the collapse of their family struck her harder than she expected. Henry, she said gently, her voice filled with compassion, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes life takes us down paths we can't foresee or control. What happened was a terrible accident, but the love Benjamin had for you and for me, that love was real. None of that can be diminished by blame or accusations. Henry looked up at Sophia, his tear-filled eyes reflecting the gratitude he felt for her words. I never thought I'd meet you, never thought I'd know who the woman my son loved truly was, he said, his voice choked with emotion. This means more to me than I can put into words. Sophia reached across the table, her hand gently resting on his. We both share the same loss, she said softly, and somehow, that connects us. I don't know why fate brought us together today, but I know we're not alone in this. They sat in silence for a few moments, both of them processing the weight of the revelations and the emotions that accompanied them. Benjamin's watch still rested in Sophia's hands, and with great care she returned it to Henry. He slipped it back onto his wrist, his expression somber and reflective. This watch, Sophia said softly, is more than just an accessory. It's a symbol of the time we shared with him. As painful as it is, it reminds me that time continues to pass, and that we must find ways to keep moving forward. Henry smiled sadly, fully understanding the depth of her words. I don't know how to move forward, he admitted quietly. After we lost everything, Olivia and I, we ended up on the streets. Now we're just surviving. Sophia felt a surge of empathy, so powerful that it made her shift in her seat. And where is Olivia now? She asked, her heart tightening with concern. Henry lowered his head. She's waiting for me. In a nearby square. We have nowhere to go, and she's even more broken than I am. Sophia took a deep breath, realizing there was something greater that needed to be done. I want to see Olivia, she said firmly. I want to help both of you. I can't change the past, but I can try to help you find a better future. Her heart raced as she walked alongside Henry through the busy city streets. The words they had exchanged in the cafe echoed in her mind. The father of the man she had loved was now by her side, and she was about to meet the woman who had once despised her. Sophia knew this moment would be difficult, but something inside her told her it was the right thing to do. Sophia could feel the weight of what lay ahead, knowing that facing Olivia would be difficult, but something inside her told her it was the right step to take. Henry walked beside her in silence, his slow and weary steps showing the toll the years and hardships had taken on him. Sophia's eyes scanned the bustling city streets, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, filled with memories of Benjamin and the unease of reuniting with his mother. She had never imagined meeting Olivia again, and just the thought of it made her tremble. But deep down, she knew she had to confront the past. After a few minutes of walking, they arrived at a small, hidden square nestled between old buildings. The place was quiet, worn down by time, with a few people sitting on benches or strolling leisurely. Under the shade of a large tree sat Olivia. The woman Sophia remembered as proud and elegant was now a fragile figure, hunched over and wrapped in a tattered old coat. Her gray hair was tied back carelessly, and her once bright eyes, always filled with pride, were now dull, staring vacantly into the distance. A small bag rested beside her, the only thing she seemed to carry. Henry approached her cautiously, as if fearing to wake a sleeping beast. Sophia followed closely behind, her heart pounding in her chest. When they got close enough, Olivia's tired eyes lifted, her face a mask of exhaustion that quickly morphed into surprise and distress upon seeing a stranger next to her husband. "Henry," Olivia murmured, her voice hoarse and weak. "Who is this woman?" Henry hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, he said softly, "Olivia, this is Sophia. She was someone important to Benjamin." The name Benjamin hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief and memories. The name Benjamin fell between them, like a stone cast into a still lake, creating ripples of tension and long-buried emotions. Olivia's eyes widened in recognition, and her expression quickly shifted to one of disbelief and anger. "You," she spat, her voice trembling with accusation. "You are the woman who took him away from us, the cause of all our misery." The sharpness of her words hit Sophia like daggers, cutting deep. But Sophia took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. She understood that if there was any chance for reconciliation, she had to be patient, no matter how painful it was. "Olivia," Sophia began, her voice steady but gentle, "I understand that you see me this way, but I'm here to help. We can't change what happened in the past, but maybe we can find a way to move forward." Olivia shook her head, her hands trembling as they gripped the worn bag beside her even tighter. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "I lost everything. Everything. My sons, my life. Nothing makes sense anymore." Sophia felt a tightness in her own chest as she looked into Olivia's eyes, raw and overflowing with the pain of loss. There was no mistaking how utterly shattered this woman had been by Benjamin's death. Henry knelt beside his wife, gently taking her trembling hands in his. "Dear," he said softly, "I know you've suffered. I have too. But today, by chance, we found Sophia, and she's willing to help us. Maybe it's time to stop running from the past." Olivia looked from Henry to Sophia, her face a swirl of confusion and hurt. Narrowing her eyes, she asked bitterly, "Why now? Why after all these years?" It was as if she was searching for a hidden motive in Sophia's sudden appearance. "Let me know if you want to continue with this sequence or make further adjustments. After everything we've been through, why would you show up now to help us?" Olivia asked, her voice thick with bitterness. "You owe us nothing." Sophia stepped forward, kneeling beside Henry to meet Olivia at eye level. Her eyes were full of compassion, and though her voice was soft, it carried the weight of all the emotions she had held inside. "I loved Benjamin," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And that's something we both know. We've lost so much, but I'm here to try to do something he would have wanted. He taught me to forgive, to care for others, and I believe, wherever he is now, he would want me to reach out to you." Olivia sat in silence, her eyes distant as the gentle wind rustled the leaves above them. The only movement in the square seemed to be that quiet breeze. Sophia could see the internal battle raging in Olivia's eyes, an intense struggle between her pride, wounded by years of grief, and the desire to finally let go of the past. At last, Olivia sighed, a long, tired breath that seemed to release years of accumulated tension. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. Henry squeezed her hands gently. "Just say you'll accept help," he whispered. "We've lived like this for so long. Maybe it's time to change." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, a small crack appeared in the rigid wall she had built around herself. "I don't know if I can trust again," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Sophia offered her an encouraging smile. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but let me help, one step at a time. I have space in my home, and you can stay with me until we find a better solution." Olivia glanced at Henry, who was gazing at her with tenderness and hope in his eyes. After a long pause, she finally nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'll try." Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears as she finally allowed the wall she had so carefully built to crack. Her voice, barely a whisper, carried all the years of pain and mistrust. "I don't know if I can trust again," she said, trembling with emotion. Sophia, still kneeling beside her, gave her an encouraging smile. "I understand," she said gently. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away. Just let me help, one step at a time. I have space in my home. You and Henry can stay with me until we figure out something more permanent." Olivia looked over at Henry, who was watching her with tenderness and quiet hope. His tired eyes begged for peace after so many years of hardship. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, letting the tears spill down her cheeks. I'll try," she whispered, her voice fragile but sincere. At that moment, it felt as though a burden had lifted, even if just a little. They weren't fully healed yet, but it was a beginning, a chance to rebuild from the ruins of their shared grief. Olivia nodded, accepting Sophia's offer, and in that moment, something shifted. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, Sophia felt that they were all moving toward healing. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the small living room of Sophia's home. Henry and Olivia had settled there the night before, still uncertain and cautious about the drastic change in their lives. Sophia's home, cozy and modern, with elegant furniture that reflected her successful life, stood in sharp contrast to the harsh reality that Henry and Olivia had endured on the streets. Sophia sat in an armchair by a large window, watching the sunrise while cradling a warm cup of coffee in her hands. Her thoughts were tangled. Having Henry and Olivia in her home meant more than offering them a roof. It was an attempt to heal old wounds, to forgive, and perhaps to finally find peace. Olivia appeared at the door, hesitating, still trying to adjust to the unfamiliar feeling of being under Sophia's roof. Seeing the once proud and fierce woman now so fragile, with her shoulders hunched from years of sorrow, stirred something deep in Sophia. Olivia's eyes were tired, but there was something new in them, a faint spark of hope. "You're up early," Sophia said with a gentle smile, motioning to the sofa beside her. "Would you like some coffee?" Olivia hesitated, as if still considering whether to accept this kindness. But after a brief pause, she slowly sat down on the sofa and softly replied, "Yes, I'd like some." "Thank you," Olivia murmured as Sophia poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Olivia wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the warmth soothe her cold fingers. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was filled with unspoken emotions. "I still can't believe I'm here," Olivia said quietly, almost to herself, staring down at the coffee. "If someone had told me years ago that I'd accept your help, I would have laughed in their face." Sophia smiled softly, understanding. "I get it," she replied. "To be honest, I never imagined we'd be here together either, after everything that happened." Olivia took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to say something she had kept buried for a long time. "I never looked at you favorably, Sophia," she admitted, her voice low. "When Benjamin first spoke of you, I immediately knew you were different from what I had expected for him. I always wanted the best for my son, and I thought that meant he needed to be with someone who could help him rise in life." Sophia remained silent, allowing Olivia to speak at her own pace, sensing the weight of the confession. "But now I see how wrong I was," Olivia continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "I lost my son. I lost everything. And I blamed you for so long. I blamed you for taking Benjamin away from us, for being the cause of all our misfortunes. But the truth is, what happened was so much bigger than any of us. Sophia felt a knot tighten in her throat. Olivia's words were something she had never expected to hear. I never wanted to take him away from you, Sophia said softly, her voice heavy with the weight of her own pain. I loved Benjamin, but I know he loved you both too. The decision to distance himself wasn't easy for him. He always wanted to please everyone. Olivia nodded, tears beginning to stream down her face. I was blinded by pain and pride. For years I fed that resentment, and it destroyed us. Not just me, but Henry too. When Benjamin left, I lost my footing. And now, after all these years, I realize you weren't to blame. I just didn't know how to cope with the loss. Sophia felt her own tears well up. The weight of regret and sadness piercing through the walls she had built around her heart. We've all lost, Olivia, she said softly. I lost the love of my life, and you lost your son. We both suffered in different ways, but neither of us came out unscathed. Olivia quickly wiped her tears, trying to hold on to the last bit of dignity she could muster. I don't know how to thank you for helping us now, after everything I put you through. Sophia met her gaze with deep compassion. I don't want thanks, Olivia. What I want is for all of us to find peace. Guilt and resentment have eaten away at us for too long. I think it's time we let that go, if not for ourselves, then for Benjamin. Olivia smiled, small and tentative but genuine. He would be happy to see this, wouldn't he? Sophia nodded, her misty eyes reflecting her agreement. Yes, he would. At that moment, Henry appeared in the room, interrupting the delicate conversation but bringing with him a lighter energy. He seemed more at ease, as if having a roof over his head and a comfortable bed to sleep in had given him a new sense of life. You two are here talking, he said with a light smile. I think that's a good sign. Sophia and Olivia exchanged glances, their shared understanding solidifying in the quiet between them. It was a good sign, one that hinted at healing and the possibility of peace. Sophia and Olivia laughed softly. Yes, Henry, we're talking, Sophia said, waving him over. I think we're starting to put the past in its place. Henry sighed in relief and sat down beside Olivia, gently taking her hand. I always knew that what we had wasn't living. After we lost everything, the pain swallowed us whole. But now, maybe we can have a second chance. Sophia looked at the couple, her heart filled with a renewed sense of hope. You have a place here for as long as you need, she said warmly. But I hope with time we can find something more permanent for you. You both deserve a fresh start. Olivia squeezed Henry's hand, a shy but genuine smile forming on her lips. Thank you, Sophia. Maybe this is our chance to finally let Benjamin rest in peace. Time passed quickly after that morning of reconciliation. Henry and Olivia gradually adapted to their new life in Sophia's home. The atmosphere, once heavy with unspoken grief and pain, was now filled with a sense of peace they hadn't felt in a long time. Sophia took care of them attentively, providing not just a roof over their heads, but also a new outlook on life. This transformation didn't happen immediately, but over time, the warmth and compassion within Sophia's home began to heal their deepest wounds. One afternoon, as Sophia was arranging paperwork in the living room, Henry walked in slowly and took a seat beside her. His gaze was distant, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. Sophia, Henry began thoughtfully, I've been thinking a lot. I don't want you to feel that we're taking advantage of your kindness. I know Olivia and I have been staying here for a while, and, Henry continued, we've been here for some time, and I am incredibly grateful for everything you've done for us, but I think it's time we find a place more permanent. Sophia looked at him with surprise, but also admiration. Henry, you're not taking advantage of anything. I do this because I want to help, and in some ways, it's helping me move forward too. But I understand what you mean. You want a place to call your own, right? Henry nodded slowly. Exactly. I think it's time for us to try to rebuild. Maybe something simple, but a place we can truly call home. Sophia smiled, touched by Henry's honesty and determination to rebuild his life. I think that's wonderful, and you don't have to do it alone. I'm here to help, but now in a different way. Together, we can find a comfortable place where you and Olivia can start afresh with dignity. Henry looked at her, clearly moved by her kindness. I don't know how to thank you enough for this. After so many years on the streets, I never thought I'd have a chance to live anything close to a normal life again. You deserve this new chance, Sophia replied softly, and so does Olivia. I'm truly glad to see you're ready to take this next step. As they spoke, Olivia entered the room, curious about the conversation. Noticing the serious expressions on their faces, she hesitated. Are you talking about leaving here? She asked, looking from Henry to Sophia. Sophia smiled encouragingly. Henry just mentioned that he thinks you both are ready to look for a home of your own. I think it's a wonderful idea. Are you ready for it? Olivia sighed, the idea bringing both a sense of relief and apprehension. I don't know, she admitted. Here, I feel safe. After everything we've been through, the thought of going out again makes me nervous. Sophia stepped closer, gently but firmly, taking Olivia's hands. I understand. No one is saying you have to do this right away. We can take it at your pace, whenever you feel ready. What matters is that you know you will always have a home here, wherever you are, and I will always be here to help. Olivia looked at Henry, who was watching her with an encouraging look of hope, as if to say they could finally move forward. She took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. Maybe it's time to start over. But I want to do it knowing we're not alone. You will never be alone, Sophia reassured her. This is a journey we'll take together. In the following days, Sophia devoted herself to helping the couple find a new home. Together, they looked through real estate listings, visited various neighborhoods, and after a few weeks, they found a cozy little house. It was simple but welcoming, situated in a quiet neighborhood near a park, where Henry and Olivia could take strolls and start their lives anew with a sense of calm. Once the house was chosen, Sophia helped organize the move and ensured everything was ready to welcome them. Their first night in the new home was filled with excitement and hope for the future. Despite their initial nervousness, Henry and Olivia were happy to finally call this little place home. The living room, with its simple furniture and warm lighting, symbolized a new beginning. That evening, as Sophia said goodbye to them at the doorstep of their new home, Henry embraced her warmly. You've given us something we could never repay, Sophia, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. A chance to be a family again. Sophia smiled, moved. You don't need to repay me. Just live this new life with all the love and gratitude in your hearts. That's more than enough. Olivia, who had once hesitated to show her emotions, stepped forward and hugged Sophia tightly. I never thought I'd be able to forgive or move forward, but now I see that forgiveness sets us free. I am so grateful for this chance you've given us. We're all healing together, Sophia said, looking at them with an affectionate smile. And I know Benjamin would be happy to see this. As Sophia walked away, leaving Henry and Olivia standing on the threshold of their new home, she felt a lightness in her heart. The past had been painful, but finally, they were all finding their way to peace. In the weeks that followed, Henry and Olivia gradually adjusted to their new life. The process wasn't immediate, but as they settled into a steady routine, they rediscovered a tranquility they had lost long ago. The simple joys, strolling through the park, enjoying quiet conversations over dinner, and sharing moments of peaceful silence, soothed their souls like a balm. Sophia visited them regularly, always making sure they lacked nothing, and their bond grew closer with each visit. The visits, which had once been brief and formal, gradually became long and relaxed. Henry, Olivia, and Sophia laughed together, shared stories, and discussed the future. Sophia had helped them find not just a physical home, but an emotional one. A place where forgiveness, healing, and love could flourish. One sunny Sunday afternoon, Sophia decided to do something special. She invited Henry and Olivia to spend the day at her house, with a surprise prepared, something that would further strengthen the bonds they had built together. When the couple arrived at Sophia's home, they were greeted by her warm smile and the aroma of a carefully prepared lunch. The atmosphere was light, and sunlight streamed through the windows, bringing a renewed sense of peace. You've come on the perfect day, Sophia said, guiding them to the dining room. I have a surprise for you. Henry and Olivia exchanged curious glances, trusting that anything Sophia had planned would be meaningful. They took their seats at the elegantly arranged table, admiring the simple yet tasteful decor. Before they could ask about the surprise, the living room door opened, and a tall, smiling young man entered. Sophia immediately stood, her eyes shining with pride. "Henry, Olivia, I'd like you to meet my son, Esteban," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "He just returned from university and was eager to meet you." Olivia's face lit up, and Henry's eyes sparkled with genuine joy. Esteban approached the table, extending his hand warmly to greet them. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, his expression kind and welcoming. "You look a lot like your mother." Henry chuckled softly as he shook Esteban's hand. "And it's clear she raised you well." Esteban smiled warmly, then gave Olivia a gentle hug, which she returned with a tender expression. Sophia looked on, her heart filled with gratitude. This wasn't just a family gathering, it was the affirmation of a new beginning, an expansion of the love and forgiveness she had carefully nurtured. In a way, Esteban's presence symbolized the continuation of Benjamin's legacy. Henry and Olivia, who had never met Sophia's son, were now connecting with a part of her life and future. During lunch, conversation flowed easily. Henry and Olivia, once weighed down by grief, seemed lighter, as if renewed by the warmth of the gathering. After the meal, Sophia suggested everyone move to the garden for coffee. Esteban, always attentive, helped Henry walk outside while Olivia and Sophia chatted happily, admiring the flowers lining the path. As they sat outside with the sun setting in the background, a sense of peace filled the air. For a brief moment, Sophia looked around and felt that everything was just as it should be. "I never thought I could have something like this again," Olivia said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "The feeling of family, of belonging, I thought those things had gone with Benjamin." Sophia gently took Olivia's hand. "We're rebuilding this together, Olivia," she said warmly. "And now we have a new chance to create something beautiful." Henry, who had been quietly gazing at the horizon, spoke softly. "You know, Benjamin left us much more than we realized. Even in his absence, he continues to bring us together. I feel as though he's here with us, seeing that we've finally found peace." Esteban, who had been listening attentively, leaned forward and spoke with calm, thoughtful words. "I believe that a person's legacy never truly disappears. Benjamin was such an important part of your lives, and now you're all part of my story, my life. I'm so grateful for that." Olivia smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek, but this time it wasn't one of sadness. "You're very kind, Esteban," she said softly. "In a way, we're all connected by something greater." The rest of the afternoon was filled with deep conversations, laughter, and a sense of reconciliation that lingered in the air. As evening settled in, Sophia took Henry and Olivia back to their new home. They said goodbye with warm hugs, promising this wouldn't be the last time they gathered. Bookmark, go back. As Sophia and Esteban walked home, she felt a sense of closure wash over her. The cycle of pain and mourning was finally ending. The past would always be a part of them, but now the future seemed brighter than ever. After months of pain, loss, and healing, Sophia, Henry, Olivia, and Esteban had found the peace and love they had long sought. Each of them, marked by the past, had learned to forgive and move forward, bound by connections deeper than blood. Sophia, who had once carried the heavy burden of losing Benjamin, now felt a profound sense of gratitude and serenity. Henry and Olivia, once consumed by grief, had found a new path forward, filled with hope. Henry and Olivia rediscovered the joy of simple things and the warmth of shared love. Esteban, with his youthful spirit and generosity, brought hope and continuity to their lives. In the end, they became a new family, reborn through forgiveness and unity. Together, they built a home filled with love, hope, and the strength to face the future, knowing that while the past had been painful, it no longer defined them. Love and forgiveness had transformed them, opening the door to a new beginning, filled with light and endless possibilities. They had learned that, in the end, healing was possible, and that peace could be found even after the darkest moments.